Not every person who walks onto a stage is there for the reason you think. Harold James Whitfield arrived at the studio 2 hours early, which his granddaughter Cora had expected, and wearing a tie, which she had also expected, and carrying a small photograph in the left breast pocket of his suit jacket, which she had not known about until she saw the slight rectangular outline of it when he stood in the morning light outside the studio entrance, and she understood, without asking, what it was and who was in it. He was 74 years old. He was a retired high school history teacher from Macon, Georgia, who had taught for 38 years at the same school, in the same classroom, which had a window that faced east, and which he had specifically requested when he was hired at 32 because he believed, on evidence he had accumulated across a long life of early mornings, that the quality of light at the beginning of a day determined the quality of thinking that happened inside it. The principal who hired him had found this unusual. Harold had been correct. He had been a widower for 2 years and 4 months. His wife's name was Ruth. They had been married 49 years. 49 years and 3 months to be precise, which Harold was about this, and she had died on a Thursday morning in February from a cancer that had declared itself 14 months before that Thursday, and that had lost the argument slowly and then quickly the way these things do, first by inches and then by everything at once. She was 69 years old when she died. He had been holding her hand. He had been reading to her from a book of poetry they had kept on the nightstand for 40 years, a particular collection she had given him as a gift in the 3rd year of their marriage, the cover of which was now soft with handling. He had kept teaching for 6 months after. Then he had retired, not because he had stopped loving the work, but because the classroom faced east, and the morning light came through the window every day exactly the way it always had, and he found that consistency harder to bear than change would have been. The Family Feud application had been Cora's doing. She was 22, his granddaughter, the youngest child of his son Philip, and she had what Harold privately described as a determination that did not require encouragement or agreement from anyone in its vicinity. She had filled out the application, submitted it, received the confirmation, told Harold he was going to be on television, and addressed his objections in the order they arrived with a patience and efficiency that reminded him, with a precision that still surprised him, of Ruth. He had agreed, finally, for a reason he did not share with Cora. He shared it with no one. He had, in the 2 years and 4 months since February, discovered that there were things he knew about himself now that he had not known before. And one of them was that grief was not only the presence of sorrow, but the absence of purpose. The specific, physical absence of having somewhere to be that was for someone other than yourself. He had spent 49 years being somewhere for Ruth. He had spent 38 years being somewhere for his students. He woke now into days that were his own entirely, which sounded like freedom and felt like something else. He said yes to the game show because he wanted to be somewhere. That was all. He wanted to have somewhere to be. The family Cora assembled was intentional and complete. Harold himself. Cora. Philip, 51, Harold's son, who had his father's precision and his mother's warmth, and who had been checking on his father every 3 days for 2 years and 4 months without being asked. Philip's wife, Sandra, 49, who was a librarian and who had loved Ruth like a second mother, and who had, in the months since, loved Harold the way you love someone who is missing someone irreplaceable, not by filling the space, but by sitting near it. And Harold's former student, Marcus Webb. Not that Marcus Webb, a different one. This Marcus Webb was 36 and had been in Harold's history class in 2006, and had stayed in touch across 18 years because some students and some teachers find each other in the particular way that changes both of them. Harold had called Marcus himself when the team needed a fifth member. Marcus had said yes before Harold finished asking. They were introduced to the warm and certain applause that greets families who appear, even from a distance, to be rooted in something real. Harold walked to the mark with the upright ease of a man who has stood in front of rooms for 38 years and has never been made smaller by being looked at. He wore a dark suit and a tie that was the specific green of the dress Ruth had worn to his retirement celebration 2 years before February. He had not mentioned this to anyone. He had chosen it deliberately. Steve Harvey looked at Harold for a moment before he said anything. He did the thing he sometimes does, the brief, full assessment, the reading of the room before the room has said anything. Then he smiled, which was genuine, and said, "Sir, you look like a man who has seen some things." Harold said, 38 years of 16-year-olds. You see everything eventually." The audience laughed immediately. Steve Harvey pointed at him. He said, "We're going to get along fine." The game, when it began, was something the studio had not seen in recent memory, and which the show's producer described afterward as watching a man play chess while everyone else was playing checkers. Harold answered with the precision of someone who had spent a career asking questions and listening carefully to what the answers revealed. Not just the words, but the patterns beneath them. He understood the surveys intuitively, the way a teacher understands a class, by reading what people were likely to think rather than what they claimed to think. He buzzed in first, consistently. He was correct, consistently. His family played well around him, Cora fast, Philip steady, Sandra strategic, Marcus Webb energetic in the way of someone who has been given an unexpected gift and intends to honor it. But Harold was the axis. He got the top answer on 7 consecutive questions. This had happened, the show's statistician confirmed afterward, twice in the show's history before that episode. Harold did not appear aware of or interested in this. He answered each question the way he had taught history, not to perform knowledge, but to use it as a tool to get somewhere true. They reached the bonus round with the highest point total the Macon studio audience had seen in 3 seasons. Harold was chosen for fast money. He sat in the chair. He put on the headphones. He answered all 5 questions, including the final question. Name something a person does to feel less alone, with the word reads, which he said quietly and without hesitation, and which was the top answer and which put the family over the threshold. They had won. The audience was on its feet. Cora was making sounds that were not quite words. Philip had both hands on top of his head. Sandra was holding Marcus Webb's arm and laughing. Marcus Webb was doing what the young man in Harold's history class had done at 16 when something important happened. He was looking at Harold first, before celebrating, to see what Harold made of it. Harold sat in the fast money chair and looked at the board showing the winning score. He was still. Not the stillness of shock, the stillness of a man who has been thinking something for a long time and has arrived at the moment when the thinking becomes a choice. Steve Harvey crossed the stage toward him. He was smiling the large, full smile of a man who has witnessed something excellent. He said, "Harold James Whitfield, you just won." Harold said, "I know what I won." He said it evenly, not rudely, with a completeness that suggested he had something else to say and needed to say it first. Steve Harvey stopped. He looked at Harold with the quick attention of someone who recognizes a frequency shift. He said, "All right." Harold stood from the chair. He stood with the careful ease of a 74-year-old man who has maintained himself deliberately and intends to continue. He reached into the left breast pocket of his suit jacket and he took out the photograph. The studio did not yet know to be silent. There was still residual sound, the settling of an audience that has just celebrated something. And then Harold held the photograph, and the settling completed itself faster than it should have, the way silence falls when the room senses without being told that something is happening. He looked at the photograph for a moment. Then he looked at Steve Harvey. He said, "Can I tell you why I'm here?" Steve Harvey said, "Please." Harold said, "My wife Ruth passed 2 years ago in February. We were married 49 years. He said this factually, in the voice of a man delivering information. But the information carried its full weight regardless of the voice carrying it. She wanted to come on this show. It was on a list she kept. Things she wanted to do. She never got to do it." He stopped. "I thought I'd come do it for her." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey looked at the photograph in Harold's hand. He said very quietly, "Is that her?" Harold said, "That's Ruth." He turned the photograph so Steve Harvey could see it. The cameras caught it. A woman in a green dress at what appeared to be a celebration, smiling with the full commitment of someone who means it. Steve Harvey looked at the photograph for several seconds. He said nothing. He pressed his lips together once. A camera operator near the stage left had bowed his head. Harold said, "She would have been very good at this game. Better than me, probably. She read people well." He looked at the photograph. She read everyone well. He said this last thing as if it were not a general statement, but a specific one. As if reading everyone well included him, over 49 years and 3 months, which it had. Steve Harvey said, "Harold." He said the name the way names are said when they are being used to hold something that would otherwise be too large for the air. He said, "What did you want to tell me about the prize money?" Harold put the photograph back in his breast pocket, carefully, in the same position it had been. He said, "Ruth was a reading teacher for 31 years. Elementary school. She had a program she ran, nothing official, no funding, just her and a folding table and whatever books she could find, for kids in the district who were below reading level and whose parents couldn't afford tutoring. She ran it for 22 years out of her own time and mostly her own pocket." He stopped. After she died, the school tried to continue it and couldn't find the budget. He said, "I would like to give the prize money to that program, the full amount, to bring it back." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey stood in front of Harold James Whitfield and did not speak for 7 seconds. 7 seconds on a live television set is an enormous silence. Long enough that a producer in the booth said afterward she thought something had gone wrong with the audio before she realized nothing had gone wrong with anything. That Steve Harvey was simply standing inside something true and was not going to pretend otherwise for the sake of pacing. He said, "You came on this game show to win money for your dead wife's reading program." Harold said, "I came on this game show because my wife wanted to come and couldn't. The money is—" He paused. "The money is what she would have done with it anyway." The studio fell completely silent again, and this time the silence had a different quality. The quality of a room that has just understood something about love that it had not understood 60 seconds ago. Something about what it looks like when love does not end with the person who taught you it, but continues, changes form, moves into action, becomes something that 4th graders sitting at a folding table with books will receive without knowing what it cost. Philip had both hands over his face. Sandra was holding his arm the way she had been holding Marcus Webb's arm, steadying herself by steadying someone else. Cora was looking at her grandfather with an expression that was not surprise. She was 22. She had known this man her whole life. She recognized who he was. But something in her recognition had deepened, had added a dimension she would spend years returning to. Marcus Webb, 36, who had been in Harold's history class in 2006 and had stayed in touch across 18 years, was crying in the straightforward way of someone who is not trying to do anything except feel what is happening. 3 production crew members were visibly moved. A woman in the second row of the audience had her hands pressed flat together in front of her face. The show's stage manager, who had been on the floor for 12 years, said afterward that she had watched her entire career flash in front of her in that 7-second silence, and that Harold had made it mean more than it had before. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the camera and stood very still. He said, "I want to talk to everyone watching at home." He said it simply, without build-up. This man drove from Macon, Georgia, with a photograph in his pocket and a plan nobody knew about. He paused. He won this game for a woman who isn't here, and he is giving every dollar to children who will never know her name, but who will learn to read because of her. He stopped. "I have been standing on this stage for a long time. I have never—" He stopped again. He said, "I want you to think about the person you love most, and I want you to think about what you would do to carry them forward if you couldn't carry them anymore." He paused. Harold already knows the answer. He came here with it in his pocket. The studio fell completely silent. Then he turned back to Harold. He said something he had not said to anyone in 9 seasons of hosting. He said, "I want to match the prize money." He said it without checking with producers, without a pause for logistics, without qualification. "Personally, whatever the show gives, I'm matching it, for Ruth's program," he said, "and I'd like to call the school right now if that's all right with you." Harold looked at Steve Harvey for a moment. He said, "She would have found that excessive." Steve Harvey said, "I know. Do it anyway." Harold said, "All right." The call was made on air. The school's principal, reached on her cell phone at 3:17 in the afternoon, was incoherent with happiness for approximately 45 seconds before she organized herself enough to confirm that, yes, the program could be reinstated, that they had the space, that they had a list of children who needed it, that they had been hoping for something exactly like this for 2 years and had not known how to find it. But he still wasn't done. He looked at Marcus Webb. He said, "Harold tells me you were his student." Marcus said, "Yes, sir, 10th grade, 2006. Steve said, "What did he teach you?" Marcus thought for a moment. He said, "That history isn't about what happened. It's about why it still matters." Steve Harvey looked at Harold. Harold said, "He got a B+. Marcus said, "I stand by that grade." The audience laughed the laugh of people who have been moved and are grateful for the movement toward something lighter. The competing family, the Okonkwo's from Baltimore, who had played with warmth and focus, and who had been on the losing side of a genuinely exceptional game, crossed the stage as a family. Their grandmother, Adeze, 71, walked to Harold and took his hand in both of hers. She said something to him in a voice too quiet for the microphones. Harold nodded. He put his free hand over hers. They stood like that for a moment. 2 elderly people who understood something about loss and continuation that the room was still learning. The episode aired 13 days later. By the end of the first day, the clip had 63 million views. By the end of the week, 108 million. It was the first Family Feud clip in 3 seasons to trend simultaneously in the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Nigeria. It was shared by hospice organizations and grief counselors and teachers' unions and literacy nonprofits, and by ordinary people who sent it to their grandparents and their parents and their partners with no message, because the clip was the message. A retired teacher in Oregon wrote in the comments that she had a similar list, things she had hoped to do, and that after watching the clip she had given the list to her husband and told him to use it however he wanted when the time came. The comment had 340,000 likes. 3 months later, Ruth Whitfield's reading program reopened at Jefferson Elementary School in Macon, Georgia, with 27 enrolled students, 2 volunteer tutors, and a folding table that the school's librarian had saved from being thrown out 2 years earlier because she had not been able to explain why she was keeping it. The program was officially named the Ruth Whitfield Reading Initiative. Harold attended the opening. He sat in a chair at the back of the room and watched the children with their books, and did not say much. Cora sat beside him. She did not say much either. They were good at being somewhere together. A year after the taping, Harold had returned to teaching. Not full-time, 2 days a week, as a substitute, which the school had offered, and which he had accepted after a month of thinking that he was done and deciding he was not. He requested the same classroom. The window still faced east. The light still came through in the morning the way it always had. He found, to his own surprise, that this was no longer harder to bear than change. He found that it was simply the same light that had been there before and during and after, which had not changed because he had, which continued for the same reason that he continued. The photograph stayed in the breast pocket of the suit jacket. He did not wear the suit jacket every day. It was not that kind of life. But when he did, he put the photograph back in the pocket. Cora asked him once why he kept it there instead of somewhere safe. He said, "It is somewhere safe." She thought about that for a long time. There is a question that grief forces, eventually, on everyone it visits, which is, what do you do with the love that has nowhere left to go? Some people seal it. Some people convert it to sorrow and carry it that way. Harold James Whitfield drove to a television studio in a green-tied suit with a photograph in his pocket and answered every survey question correctly, and won a prize he had already decided did not belong to him, and gave it instead to the children who would never know Ruth's name, but would have her gift anyway. He did not call this love. He called it coming on the show because his wife wanted to and couldn't. But those are the same sentence. He was a history teacher. He understood that the most important things tend to be the same sentence. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who understands what it means to carry someone forward. And subscribe, because there are more stories here that have always deserved to be told.